guys, it's Focal Pineapple and Happy New Year. Happy to see you guys all back, of course. And in this video, we're going to be discussing every death that happens in My Hero Academia's War Arc, since the War Arc is more or less over and we're going to be moving on into the next arc of the series, which is the Dark Deku arc. So I really felt like now would be the appropriate time to end up doing this video. So let's go over it. We're going to discuss every character death in My Hero Academia Season 6's War Arc, starting with Johnny. Now, I'm not going to go over every single little tiny Nomu death or anything like that, but I did want to go over Johnny because, I don't know, this character was kind of in the background using his quirk to help the League of Villains for a long time, and Nomu aren't really cute, right? But I think as far as Nomu go, this is probably the closest to cute I could probably get, right? I even have an emoji on the channel for members of Johnny, so RIP to Johnny. It was really sad to see you go, but let's move on to some actually important character deaths. Now, the first major character death that we saw in Season 6 of My Hero Academia was actually one of the top 10 pro heroes, Crust. And we started to get to know Crust a little bit, but we didn't get to know him well enough to know his real name as far as I know at this point. Maybe we'll learn that at the very end of the series when Horikoshi probably does a final data book for the series going all the way up to the final events, right? But Crust was one of those heroes who you could tell was heavily influenced by All Might to a certain extent because he did have a big bright smile and just something about him kind of gave me that sort of All Might like persona. But Crust does give off the appearance of sort of like a warrior, right? Like he sort of gives off like a gladiator vibe, I guess, a little bit, and that kind of does fit, I'm sure, because in a lot of situations Crust would actually be very capable, right? If you just don't put him against the situation that he ended up being in this war arc, he might have ended up being okay, because his quirk shield is actually very useful. We see that he can produce shields from his body using, I guess, I don't know, some material that comes out of his body, and they actually are very viable shields, blocking him from high-end Nomu attacks and even being able to pierce into the flesh of those strong high-end Nomus. So you can see how versatile shield and Crust could be in many different incidents, but sadly he was in a situation here where there was really not much that he can do, right? Considering that the shields are part of his body, he really couldn't have defended himself against the giant wave of decay that ended up killing him. But even in dying, Crust does something amazing by allowing Aizawa to get free, using one of his last shoot shields, kind of mimicking Captain America by throwing a disc shield at the enemy. He cuts off the high-end Nomu's arm so that Aizawa can get away, and we know that Aizawa ended up being very important for this battle, because if Aizawa wasn't there, Shigaraki would have just destroyed Deku and everyone else there immediately. He wouldn't have been nerfed at the very beginning of that battle between Deku and everyone and just had to deal with everyone without his quirk. So Crust really did enable the heroes to kind of get, I don't know, the closest they could to a victory, and we've even seen in this final arc that Aizawa has definitely been very important. So shout out to Crust for keeping the train going of characters giving their lives so that Aizawa can keep living, because I'm sure eventually Aizawa's going to have to kind of give that back, right? Aizawa is eventually going to be on one of these lists of characters that I think is going to die by the end of the season. But let's not get on that sad note and let's go on to the next actual character death. Now, the third death that we see in My Hero Academia Season 6 is actually a character named Eel Boy. And yeah, I know it seems like who cares about this random hero, but Eel Boy actually does have some ties to Ochako's backstory, because in Ochako's backstory, we see that she actually had seen Eel Boy saving some people one time, and he was getting celebrated by the town. And that's kind of where she started getting a lot of her drive and her passion from, by seeing how the people reacted to the heroes and that whole situation. So Eel Boy does at least have some, you know, ties to some of the main characters in My Hero Academia, even though they are small. Now, I always thought that this guy's costume is really weird, right? Because he does have kind of like a torn open mouth hole. It looks like he literally just bites it open for some reason. It's not like his suit is designed to have that in mind, I think. And even in the flashback of Ochako, that's exactly how he's designed. So I guess that's just kind of his vibe. He likes having a torn open mouth like that, looking all flappy. But of course, this is a hero that we see trying to apprehend Toga and Mr. Compress while Hawks is fighting Twice. And eventually we do see a Twice clone come down and kind of handle him before he ends up taking Toga and Mr. Compress away using his strange kind of ghostly eel quirk. We see Twice make really quick work of him using a knife to just cut the back of his head and just take him out rather quickly. But we do go on to see Eel Boy a little later again when Toga takes his blood and transforms into him to sneak into the heroes and start taking them out after the next death that we're going to talk about on this list. Because of course the fourth death, and one of the biggest ones in the entire arc overall, that happens right at the beginning is the death of Jin Bubai Gawara, otherwise known as Twice. Now, Twice is one of the mainstay members of the League of Villains. He is kind of the comic relief of the group, really keeping the group from getting as serious and as dark as they get a little later in the future. And in a lot of ways, Twice was really the heart of the group, right? Like when Giron got captured by the Metal Liberation Army, Twice didn't want to go get him back because they disrespected the League or anything like that. that, he considered Giron his friend, right? So he was like, hey, I want to go get my friend back. I consider all of us friends. We can't just let them do our friend like that. Like, that's messed up. That's dirty. And even if we are villains, or no matter what we're labeled as, we're still a group of friends, family if you want to call it, and we need to protect each other. And Twice, even though he was goofy and he was kind of just a strange guy, he was definitely a friend, and a very, very good friend to people. And at the end of the day, even Hawks, the guy who killed him, will tell us that Jin Bubaigawara was a very, very good guy, and in his heart he just wanted to protect others, but he ended up being in a situation where the only people who would be around him, or that he could be around and be accepted by, ended up being villain. And we know obviously Twice has a very, very tragic backstory with him just really not having any good luck in life and ending up having just a series of very, very bad days that led to him being in the situation that he was in. And yes, he did make some bad decisions eventually once he was in that situation, but I feel like at the end of the day, Twice is one of the strongest examples of a character who, yes, is a villain, but acts and behaves in a way that is very heroic still at some times. So it was very, very sad to see Twice go, and very, very shocking at the time, because I just definitely wasn't expecting Twice to be the next death in the series. I expected Hawks to capture him or something, but once Dabi got involved and it kind of just became an all-out life or death battle, it was really crazy to see Hawks swoop down and just take Twice out. And it was very, very shocking for the timeline, who didn't believe it for a week or two, until we ended up seeing Twice's body just kind of laying there, and reality really stuck that we did lose Twice, and that is still one of the biggest deaths in My Hero Academia in total, in my opinion, because Twice was one of my favorite characters in the series. But we are going to see he does live on in some way, shape, or form, and we will see and explore how that happens a little later on the channel. Now, this next death didn't really need to happen, but this character just pulled the short stick, I guess, right? They just got really unlucky by having to be on Shigaraki duty, because of course I'm talking about the hero Exless. Now, Exless we actually originally saw a little earlier on in the series in the Hideout raid, when we saw Best Jeanist and Gang Orca and various other characters getting ready to raid the villains during the Camino incident. And Exless back then was definitely wearing a different costume. I just think they didn't know what colors to give him, though eventually it did become obvious that it was going to become a different color costume, I'm sure, through Horikoshi just quickly communicating with Bones or including Exless in color pages. Now, Exless is a hero who's pretty much like My Hero Academia's Cyclops, right? He has one eye he can shoot a laser from, and in the season 6 of My Hero Academia, he actually did get some scenes to cook while they were fighting the high-end Nomus in the lab, right? They did give him a couple scenes to actually do some cool work, because I always just looked at this guy as just being kind of one of those fodder, lesser heroes, but he did put in some work and show the reason that he was selected for this operation. Now, of course, what ends up actually happening to Exless is once they have Shigaraki out of the pod and they think that Shigaraki is dead, Exless is weirdly given the duty to protect Shigaraki's body while they figure out what's going on in the rest of the lab and take out the rest of the high-end Nomu and everything. But at a key moment, some of the machinery nearby ends up sparking Shigaraki back to life, and Shigaraki very quickly says, "I'm cold," and ends up decaying Exless, keeping his cape, and that's the cape that Shigaraki has for the rest of the war arc. So it's kind of funny, Exless ended up just being like a shopping trip for Shigaraki. Now, the next character to die in season 6 of My Hero Academia, actually I think like number 5 or 6 on our list, is actually Nemuri Kayama, otherwise known as the hero Midnight. Now, this is really sad and tragic, because obviously we've known this character since the beginning of the series, right? And a lot of people definitely weren't prepared for her to go, but since the villains did take some very notable losses in this war arc, I think it was definitely right for the heroes to lose somebody as well. And while it wasn't someone like you would argue is very major, like Aizawa or All Might or somebody, right? I still think this was a very shocking and sad loss, especially for the students more so anybody. And again, it's just another friend that Aizawa lost after he already lost Shirakumo to the villains, and now it's pretty much just him and President Mike alive from their friend group, and I find that very sad, because Aizawa just keeps losing everybody. But Midnight, of course, we remember throughout the series as the voluptuous R-rated hero who was able to expose some of her skin and of course use the noxious fumes that come out of her skin to knock people out, and she did put in a lot of work in this arc, but she ended up being a little too ambitious in trying to attack Gigantomachia and not knowing that the League was on his back, right? So at that moment, we saw Dabi kind of shoot a fire blast in her direction, as well as Compress really being the one to do the most damage by throwing a pebble or a marble at her that had a lot of crumbled building parts from the raid previously inside of it. So once those building parts hit her in midair, we don't see exactly how they fall with her, but it's likely that they did fall on top of her to a large extent, or at least like hurt very bad when she fell from that very high distance. And we saw later on that another group of villains did end up approaching Midnight while she was giving her final orders to Momo, and they did end up finishing the job, taking out the pro hero, who was then later found by her students, which again was very, very difficult to see and very, very sad. Midnight is probably the most notable loss for the hero cast. I mean, we have Crust, who technically is a higher ranked hero, but we definitely knew Midnight way longer, right? So that was definitely a shocking loss on the hero side, and RIP, it is still sad that she's gone, right? There's no one to kind of fill the hole in the cast that she left. Now, next up, honestly, we have a series of characters who were killed by Gigantomachia, right? And Gigantomachia's rampage, or at least the ensuing rampage between him and the villains and the Nomu on his way over to Shigaraki. So initially, when we have Gigantomachia sort of rampaging, we lose a character named Funkman, right? We saw that he died early on in the Gigantomachia rampage, and Funkman is a character who we really didn't spend any time with throughout the series. I believe in the manga he only gets a line of dialogue, and then he gets like a face box at the very end of the arc when we see the tally of all the heroes that actually died, which I'll show you at the end of the video, of course. But yeah, we see that Funkman didn't make it, and his assistant, or I guess his sidekick, maybe his girlfriend, I don't know, she has a cowboy hat on too, so I'm just guessing she's part of his whole jam. She reacts saying, "No way, Funkman is," and in the manga I think we see, "No way, Funkman's really gone," but it's not that much. It's kind of an inconsequential loss for the heroes. And of course, the next hero that we lost in the battle against Gigantomachia is actually a big one, because it was the hero Majestic. And Majestic, I really liked his design. I didn't quite like the colors that they ended up picking to go with in the anime, but I did like how he kind of had that sort of Doctor Strange, covered in different fabrics and stuff vibe. His hat gives me sort of like a Soul Eater vibe for some reason. And all in all, I just like characters who have bandages over their eyes, right? I think that's really cool, because how are you seeing? Like, what kind of magic trick are you doing there, buddy? If you remember early on, Majestic is actually one of the heroes that Momo ended up doing her internships with, and I believe that Majestic is even the reason that none of the students ended up losing their lives, right? Because he used his rings to kind of push them away and fly them further away from Gigantomachia's wrath. But it seems like in the process of doing this, he actually lost his life, and he wasn't able to stop Gigantomachia from, of course, making his way over to Shigaraki's area. So sadly, Majestic is another one of the deaths that we're gonna have to just mark down to Gigantomachia, because that was just a really bad situation for the heroes to be in, right? They definitely didn't know that Gigantomachia was gonna move, and that messed up everything for them in this war arc. The next death is actually a character that we knew all the way back in My Hero Academia Season 2, and we met Native back during the Stain arc when Ida was trying to chase down Stain, and Native was actually the hero that Stain was trying to take down in that alleyway when Ida kind of interrupted and got in his way, and then ended up starting the events of that final battle between him, Deku, and Todoroki. So of course, Native goes on to survive that arc because of our Class 1A heroes, but he ends up getting taken out here by one of the near high-end Nomu that escaped the lab after Shigaraki broke free, and of course selectively used decay to only decay the tubes around them so that they could break free and continue to help him in the battle. We actually know specifically which high-end Nomu took Native out, and it was the weird kind of berserk dog high-end Nomu that would end up ripping his arm off and kind of just taking him out of the fight entirely, and it seems like it didn't stop there because Native didn't make it. And lastly, I wanted to add this one in because it's really just a funny anime-only death that they felt like they needed to include for some reason, and that of course is the death of Master Driller, who was a hero that we saw going up against a high-end Nomu in Burnin's area, and he ended up using his quirk, which was a large drill, to save Burnin from this kind of weird Barracuda high-end Nomu, which is really scary, and I really wouldn't want to be in that area. But he ended up getting chomped on by that high-end Nomu, who ended up chewing through him in his weird fake Gurren Lagann cosplay, and then of course ending the hero there. And that, folks, as far as I remember, is every big death in Season 6 of My Hero Academia's war arc. Now, here we have an image that shows what the manga shows us to be a lot of the deaths on the hero side, and I do believe on Twitter there was a person that ended up finding the names for every single character in this list, because someone was like, you can't even name all these people, name 10 people of this list when this happened in the manga. But I hope that this list has been helpful for you guys, and of course we're going to be discussing soon what's happening with all of our characters in the hospital and who's going to make it or not through that, but that's discussion for the next arc of My Hero Academia. So I'll leave you guys to it for now, and it's Pineapple. I'll see you later. Peace.